Alrighty, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logging in from. Welcome to Tuesday Talks, and we're so excited that you're here. I'm going to give everybody a minute to just get situated. If you are on Zoom this evening or morning, wherever you are, make sure you go ahead and open up your Q&A box and your chat box because I definitely want this to be interactive. And if you have questions right from the get-go, I want you to go ahead and put them in because that way we can fold it into our conversation. And if you are needing some Chinese language support, as usual, we will have another live stream. And let me just pull that up so you guys can see that. All right, can you all see it? There's a QR code. 如果需要中文翻译的话，可以去小鹅通. You can scan that QR code and get to the Chinese translation for today's talk. And we may or may not, I think we probably will, play Spot Mr. View. So if you could please get your video boxes open, make sure you're on gallery view so you can see all of us during the whole conversation. And Mr. View will probably pop up sometime. He can show up anytime. So just have your screenshot skills ready. And you'll take a screenshot and you'll send an email with the screenshot to contact@initialview.com, and I'm putting it in the chat now. And then you'll get a little prize, and that'll be fun. And finally, I just want to say thank you so much again to our sponsor schools. We're so thrilled that we have so many sponsor schools, and we're excited that you've been getting the word out. And Tuesday Talks only happens because you guys show up every week. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to have a great conversation today. I am making sure that my live stream, everybody is there who needs to be there. So if you're on Xiaotong, say hello. And also there's YouTube as well. If for some reason your Zoom is a little bit finicky, we're live on YouTube as well. So if it breaks down here, go to YouTube or Xiaotong and you'll hear the whole conversation there. Well, this is my favorite topic. We talk about so many things at Initial View about the application process. But this topic about interviewing is definitely one of my favorites, since I myself have interviewed thousands of students, and I think it's such a great way to know students and for you to be yourself. And so I love this topic. And I invited, excuse me, I invited some special guests today from three very, very great institutions. You all know that I myself went to liberal arts college, so I'm always very excited when liberal arts colleagues join me. I really enjoyed the college experience, and I think it's a great fit for many of you. So without further ado, I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves, and I'm going to start in the order of my screen. Colby, could you just start off and introduce yourself?
Yes, hello, good morning, afternoon, not sure what time it is. Right now, it's early on the West Coast in the US right now. My name is Colby Stallings. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm a Senior Assistant Dean of Admissions at Pomona College. Just a little bit about Pomona. Pomona is a small, traditional liberal arts college located in Claremont, California. We're about 45 minutes outside of downtown Los Angeles. We are a part of the Claremont Colleges, which is a consortium of 5 small liberal arts colleges. What's great about our consortium is if you're a student at one of the colleges, you're a student at all of the colleges, so you can take classes at the other 5 Claremont colleges. Pomona is the oldest and the largest of the 5 Cs. We offer 48 majors across the liberal arts. Our most popular majors are computer science, pre-med, biology, economics, media studies, psychology, to name a few. We have a 8-to-1 faculty to student ratio. Our average class size is 15 students. So that's just a small amount of information about Pomona. So I'll pass it over to the next person on my list, which is Miranda.
Hi, good morning or good evening, everyone. My name is Miranda Zola, and I'm a Senior Assistant Dean of Admission at Wesleyan University. Wesleyan is located in Middletown, Connecticut. It's between New York City and Boston. And it's a city of about 50,000 people, but with a lot more different options in town to check out than you would think for a city of that size. Wesleyan is a liberal arts and sciences college, and we have an open curriculum, so there are no core required courses. Students have a lot of flexibility to choose from the more than 1,000 different courses that we offer each year. We also have a lot of research opportunities in all disciplines, and the social atmosphere really values interaction, collaboration, and supporting each other while also engaging in a rigorous curriculum. And some of the programs we're known for among our 45 majors include natural sciences and psychology, as well as the arts, especially theater and film studies. I'm very glad to be here with you today, and I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Miranda. Excuse me. Usually when I'm presenting with Pomona, we're right after, so I can say it's sunny in Southern California, but it's always sunny in Philadelphia. Anyway, it's early. So I am Lisa Shen. I am a Senior Assistant Dean and Director of International Recruitment at Swarthmore College, which is located right outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is why I say that. We are also a small liberal arts college outside here in our beautiful Arboretum campus, which you can kind of see behind me in this virtual background. We also are unique in liberal arts colleges in that we offer an engineering program fully in-house. So if that's of interest to students, and the great thing about doing that at Swarthmore is that you could be a theater major that's also taking liberal arts classes, or sorry, engineering classes, which we definitely encourage students to do. Like I said, we're in an Arboretum campus, so you get the best of both worlds, where you have this residential community, but you also have access to the city, where we have a train that goes right into Philadelphia. Having a little bit of a tech glitch here. Anyway, so similar to my colleagues here, Swarthmore offers over 40 different majors. We also have the option of a design your own major, where you could take coursework from various different fields that we offer and put it together and design something yourself. So some examples are like medical anthropology, architecture, as well as circus studies. So if that's something of interest to you, definitely check us out. All right, thank you.
What a fun fact. I didn't know about circus studies. I've done so many presentations with you, and that's I heard you say that. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for introducing yourselves, and everybody. I'm going to put out a poll because I want to know who's here. I can see your names in Zoom, but I don't know where you are in the process. So if you are able to take this poll real quick and tell me if you are applying to college this year, or if you are a parent, or we'd love to know. And as it's going, it looks like majority of you are applying to college this fall, which is great because this is a very timely conversation, because you're about to do your interview. If you haven't already done an interview, you're about to do interviews any day now. So fantastic. And we see there's a few of you younger students. I'm glad to see you here earlier, and thank you parents for being here. And I guess some counselors as well. So fantastic. Well, as usual, I'm going to start off with a chat question. And so get your chat box open, and I'm going to make sure that you all can chat to everyone. Let's see. Yep. Okay. There you go. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word interview? Go ahead and type the first reaction. Like if you hear the word interview, what do you think of? What are your feelings? Pressure. Good speaking. All right, good. Life story, talking about yourself and what you like, introducing yourself. It's face to face. Confidence, formal. Who are you? Very good. These are great. A chance to show who you are beyond words. Great communication, conversation. This is great. All right. I love it. I love how some of you are like formal, because I do think that sometimes when we hear the word interview, there is a little bit of like, oh, I need to get dressed up. I need to wear a suit. I need to be a certain way. But others of you said conversation, which this is what we are going to talk about today, about what the interview is going to be: an additional reference. It's personal. It's an opportunity to show your passion. Great. These are great. Now, I want you to think, because a lot of you already talked about like showing yourself, who you are, introductions. So what's one thing you wish people knew about you? If there's one thing that you really wish people knew about you, and this could be your friends, or this could be people that you're meeting for the very first time, what's something, and while people are thinking about this, it could be anything, I'm going to ask my guests, what's one thing you wish people knew about you? So, Lisa, you want to start? I'm putting you on the spot.
Sure. So I am somebody who likes to laugh, but I do not like comedies. So I wish people knew that about me, because everyone's always trying to get me to watch some comedy sitcom or movie, and I just really don't like them. So it's a special comedy to make me like it.
Amazing. What does make you laugh then, if it's not watching comedy?
Conversation, hanging out with my friends, I mean, comedy, like YouTube series, like short things are funny, like cat videos.
Okay.
But just like the whole like scripted comedy is not really my thing. Stand up is not my thing. It makes me feel so uncomfortable and awkward, and I get like I have like a very visceral reaction to that. And so I think that's just like what I don't like about it.
Cool. Awesome. Colby, what about you? What's something you wish people knew about you?
I feel like I'm a pretty open book, so I've been trying to think the last 2 minutes of what I wish people knew about me. But I think I pretty much share a lot of what who I am and what I do. So maybe just that, like, I'm very passionate about a lot of different things, not just like one or two things. I like to try out a lot of new things. Maybe this just popped up in my head, that I believe you should learn something every day. So I start the day and I go throughout my day trying to learn something new. So I think I wish people knew that about me.
Yeah, wonderful. And Miranda, what about you?
Well, I'm kind of the opposite of Lisa. I love comedies, but horror movies or crime shows make me feel very uncomfortable and awkward. So I prefer to avoid those. It would be helpful if people knew that about me. But also, I really love to write and also read memoirs and learn about other people's stories. And I think that's also part of the reason that I enjoy admissions and reading all of the students' applications as well.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you found a job that fits your interests. Well, good. Well, I see some students have put down things that they wish people knew about. They wish people knew about them. Sorry about that. Your resilience, your past experiences, electric guitar skill. That's awesome. You wish people knew that you were competitive. Your idol is Sushi. I don't know who that is, but maybe somebody else knows. But see, if he was doing an interview, he or she was doing an interview with me right now, I could ask a clarifying question. And passion for service and your kindness and willingness to help. These are great. And these are things that admissions officers do want to know about you in the process. And there are many ways that you can kind of tell them about these things. And we've talked about that many times in Tuesday Talks. We've talked about all the ways that admissions officers get to know you through the application. There are different components. And some of those things are kind of live, like hard skills, things that are really tangible, things that are measurable. And some of those things are really not measurable. Like, this interesting fact that Lisa shared, it's not really measurable. Like, but it is very interesting and part of who she is. And so, so I wanted to kind of put this out there just so we have context as we are beginning this conversation about why an interview adds to the application, what kind of context it brings to admissions officers, and a little bit about what you all can be thinking about as you prepare for the interview. Thank you, Droya. You told me that Shushi is a great poet in ancient Chinese literature. So everybody who didn't know that, that is who Shushi is, and that this person's idol. So, and the follow-up question that I probably would have had in the interview was to talk a little bit about this person's love for literature. Okay, well, I want to talk about context, because we entitled this talk "Providing Context Interviews," but I think the word context sometimes is a little bit lost. We hear it often, but I would love for us to kind of talk a little bit more in depth of what that might mean for you all. So, so I'm just going to ask you guys, when you say the word context, what are you referring to?
So sometimes when we talk about students' context, we're talking about the circumstances that they're coming from in terms of where they grew up in the environment and social context as well. But in particular with interviews, a lot of times we'd like to know more context about why students are involved in the activities that they list on their activity lists and what makes them interested in and passionate about the things that they choose to be involved in during their time in high school.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with context, I think the main thing to keep in mind is that everyone's situation is very independent and different. And so one student may not have time to do a lot of extracurricular activities or research or anything along those lines, but their context could be that they have family responsibilities or they have a long commute to get to school or anything like that. And those are things that we care to learn a lot about in the holistic review because they help us understand the student and the student's motivations a lot better. And so you don't necessarily have to be in formal activities to provide context and to provide information about who you are as a person.
When I think of context, I think of getting the details and the description of who you are as a person throughout the whole application process, right? So if we're thinking of your extracurricular list, anything like that, you only have a certain amount of words to describe and tell us what you do. So the interview is able to connect everything, give us those details of why you're passionate about or what your most important extracurricular thing is. So just give us context of everything about who you are kind of as a whole person and connects everything for us.
Yeah, we have talked about context in previous Tuesday talks, and we've talked a little bit about where students or how you are able to learn about students' context. So for example, a high school profile that gives you some understanding of where they're going to school and what type of classes are offered. But there are some ways that students can provide additional context to you, like in the additional info section. But I tend to think that interviews are a great place to do that because, like Lisa said, there are many. I mean, you all are very individual and independent people, and there are a lot of circumstances that may or may not apply to even people in your little community. So, doing an interview obviously allows for that a little bit. So, I want to ask the admissions officers. Let's talk a little bit about. We're just going to cut to the chase. Like, what are some mistakes and pitfalls that you see either in interviews you yourself have done before or interviews that you've watched, in review, like initial view interviews? Where do you see people kind of tripping up?
Where I see people tripping up is it seems like they have a script going into the conversation, into the interview. It's good to be prepped and practice your interview skills, because interviewing is a skill, and you want to make sure you are speaking eloquently and you know about yourself, right? But you shouldn't have a script that you are trying to memorize and tell the admission counselor or initial view. So just be able to reflect on who you are as a person, share some stories, come up with some examples, but then just be your authentic self through the process. I really see students really struggle, especially because there are going to be interview questions that you didn't prep for. So if you only prep for a certain amount of questions or a certain theme of questions, then that can really toss you. So just be reflective and be your authentic self.
Yes, I would second that. We really want to have an authentic conversation and see what it's like to interact with you and kind of get insight into your thought process. So sometimes it's actually very interesting for the interviewer to notice that we asked a question that you hadn't prepared for and be able to see how you react and think through that question. And being able to do that and think on your feet is a really valuable skill. And also, I guess, one caution is that especially if you do prepare and interview, it could be more difficult to actually respond to the question that's being asked. And sometimes people who are interviewing might be tempted to just go on giving their pre-prepared speech, but that can leave a very negative impression because it seems that it's not a true conversation. And we do truly want to see that authenticity coming through.
That's a really good point, Miranda. That makes me think of like when politicians are interviewed on TV and then they don't answer the question and you're like, what's going on here? So that, you're not a politician, but that's definitely still the case where we ask questions of why is this question not actually being answered? One thing that I would say is when students just reiterate their activities list, it really takes me out of the conversation. We can see what your activities are. You have a little description on your application. So what we really want to know is why are you doing certain things? How did you get into it? What is your interest a bit around it? How does it really make your story stronger or make you a much more interesting person outside of just being on a college application list? I think, sometimes it's easy to, like Colby said, pre-memorize everything and just hit the bullet points like I did this and I did this and I did this, but then what's the context again around all of that? And so I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. A mistake is a kind of harsh word, but one of the biggest things that I see a lot in interviews that can make things a little bit more confusing or just like boring for us, I guess.
Right.
If you want to think of it that way.
Yeah. And I think, like a lot of this, even as we were talking about doing this session, just for the benefit of the audience, like I could have really scripted out are the things we're going to talk about today. But I actually decided to leave it up pretty open because I wanted to kind of model what it's like to just have a conversation and to feed off of one another a little bit. And also, because it's more, if you're more spontaneous, I mean, I knew that these three individuals would know the answers to my questions because they have been doing this. Just like you will know the answers to questions that interviewers ask because you have your own experiences. So the key is actually knowing your experiences, but not memorizing your experiences. I just came back from the National Admissions College Counseling Conference, NACAC, and I was talking to another admissions office colleague, and I said, don't you feel like most of the interviews, like it can only help? And he said, yes, it can only help unless the student is just talking about the one topic that they want to talk about. And he gave an example of a student who just like couldn't come off of physics, even though the interviewer kept asking him different questions about all sorts of aspects of his life. He just kept going back. I just really want to talk about this physics research. I want to keep talking about this research. we love when a student is really excited about one subject and topic, but we also want to know other things about you. And so if someone's specifically asking you about another area of your life and you try to jam the original topic back in, it feels like you're a little bit, A, you're not listening, B, you don't have anything else to talk about, C, you're kind of not being respectful and kind to the person who's talking to you. So these are all like little things that are not, again, not super measurable, but things that are important for an admissions officer to think about when they are thinking about building a community and a class of people who are going to be interacting with each other.
Can I add to that, Gloria?
Yeah, please do.
On that point, why do we look at interviews is kind of a question. Like, they're optional for applications, but why are they something that we provide as an option? For highly selective colleges or selective colleges, it's important to remember that classrooms are usually discussion based and that we really care about these conversations that you're having. And if you are somebody who is, has to be really prepared for everything or is very only focused on this one topic and you think that's the only thing people want to know about you, then we have to consider how that is going to contribute to the classroom environment when you are on campus. So when we are in these small, intimate classes where maybe there's only 5 other students with you, if you are not somebody who's going to contribute to that conversation or not somebody who can have these kinds of dialogues with faculty members, those are things that admission counselors have to consider when we are reading the application, because we are these small communities and small, intimate areas. And so we want to have this type of community with us that has a back and forth instead of just a one-track mind.
Yeah, great. I love that. I love that Lisa said, "Can I add something?" And that is an example of like that back and forth, because we could have just left it where I asked a question, everybody gave an answer at the end, next question. But part of the whole interview, especially for college, I think, sometimes for a job interview, you might have one of those robo interviews and you can only answer whatever they ask. But in this kind of dynamic interview, we really do actually like this. Can I add something? Or can I ask a clarifying question? Or let me ask a question back to you. And I love that. And I think a lot of times when you're approaching a college interview, you kind of think like, I can't do that. But in fact, that's something definitely not measurable. It's not like there's a checkbox that says, oh, ask the clarifying question. It's just that when you ask the clarifying question, the admissioner or the interviewer has a chance to gets a little glimpse of what you would be like in the classroom. Like, oh, he or she definitely wants to make sure that they're on the same page as the person they're talking to. And that's fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about ways to prepare. I think we have a lot of people here who already are needing to do their interview right now. but there are some younger students, so we can start there. Like if they're for the juniors and sophomores that are on this call, what are some things that would be good to do to prepare for an interview? Oops, Miranda, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Based on the activities that you're involved in, I think you can anticipate some of the topics that might be discussed and think a little more deeply about why you choose to be involved in the voluntary activities, as well as what role that you've played in different group activities you've been a part of. When we review applications, we see a lot of different activities on the list that might be joint projects. And the interview can be a great time to get more insight into specifically what you were doing as part of that project and how it influenced your learning, as well as how you influenced the outcome of the project and the group dynamic. And it can be really meaningful for us to get more insight into what those things we see on your application really mean and what they meant to you within your high school experience.
Yeah, and I'll add to this because I know that in some of the regions of the world that we're talking to, a lot of there are a lot of other people involved in your process, even as a young child. And so maybe a parent is saying that you should do this activity, or maybe there's a teacher in your life that's like, oh, this is a better activity for you. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wise, especially when you're young. You might not know exactly what you're good at or what you, and a parent or a teacher can guide you that way. But I want to caution all the parents and the counselors on the call. At some point, the student needs to really own that. And you know, some of you in China have heard of the 24K gold activity. And I don't know what the current 24K gold activity is, but then everybody feels the pressure to do 24K gold activity. But then when it comes time for the interview, and one of us is asking, why do you like this? Or tell me about the motivations behind it, or like what gained from it. And if you yourself, if your child or student hasn't owned it, they're going to have a real tough time with that question. So really do things that when you're younger, you get a chance to try a lot of things. And then if you're not thrilled about them, then pivot and move to something else. Because if you're not thrilled about it, no matter how you talk about it, it's just not going to come across compelling. And so if you don't like doing it, maybe it's not the thing for you. What else can we do? For the older students, for the students who are about to interview, like what are some thoughts that you have for preparation?
Yeah, I have 3 tips that I've been thinking about, and this could be for the younger students or the ones that are should be interviewing soon. One, probably more for the younger students. Read some autobiographies, some biographies. Not have to be full books, but seeing how people talk about themselves might help you kind of reflect and think about how you will talk about yourself as well. As I mentioned before, interviewing is a skill, so just practicing conversation and talking about things you're passionate about would be very helpful in that conversation. For me, the best interviews that I've been a part of, I usually have 15 to 20 prepped questions, and I'll probably pull from maybe 7 or 8 of those. But my best interviews are I only get to 1 or 2 of those questions, and we're going, as Gloria was talking about, back and forth, and me having follow-up questions, and we go on that tangent of who Sushi is as a person, and why you're passionate about them, and why they're inspirational to you, and we just go on a whole different track of a conversation. So being able to practice those skills can be great. I think either recording yourself or doing a Zoom interview with like your friends, your family, recording that session, and then seeing how you present yourself is also could be very beneficial. So if you can see that you're just thinking the whole time and you're like in your head, that's not what we want to see, right? To us, that will look at, or even if it's not you memorizing a script, that can kind of be perceived that way. So just look at that and see how you want to present yourself and how you can be more authentic and have that conversation flow a little bit better.
Yeah. I like to tell students to play the predict the follow-up question game because a good interviewer will ask you questions. There will be times when you face interview with
Did Gloria pause for you guys? Okay. I guess while she's paused, I can add to a tip how to prepare. So I think Colby is absolutely right. Interviewing is a skill, and practicing is important. Like any other skill, like playing the electric guitar, playing the piano, doing art or whatever, you kind of need to practice. And so talk to people. You don't have to be the most outgoing and extroverted person. But you should definitely be practicing, being able to talk about yourself, being able to have conversations with strangers. That could be a little challenging in the school environment, but maybe there's friends, maybe there's teachers who might be able to help you with that. I'm not encouraging you to go up to strangers to just start talking about yourself, but having that practice environment is really important. Hi, Gloria.
Sorry, I dropped, but I'm back. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so I was saying predict the follow-up question, right? Yeah. I think like if you know that follow-up questions are gonna come, like the example is what is your favorite subject? And then let's say your favorite subject's math. So then your friend is gonna basically, you want to predict, okay, what are you gonna ask me about math? Are you gonna ask me, why I like math, what type of math I like? Do I want to study math in the future? What types of math projects have I been involved in? Did you do any competitions? Like you basically want to list all the possible kind of follow-up questions there are to make sure that you can go deep. And if you're not able to go deep, then it's one, you either have to go prepare and think about those questions, or two, like maybe this is not a topic that's interesting and provides additional benefits to your application. Like if you're not able to go deep, then maybe that's not a necessary thing to be telling admissions officers. And so that's kind of a game that I like to play and think about. I love the recording yourself piece that Colby mentioned. That's so good because you are able to kind of see what works and what doesn't work for you. And what else? Miranda, did you have something to add to?
Yeah, Colby also alluded to having questions prepared to ask the interviewer. And I think that's a great point, especially if you're interviewing with a current student or an alum of the school that you're interested in. It can be a great experience for you, not only to present yourself to the school, but also to learn more about the school through your conversation with the interviewer. And interviewers really like to see that level of engagement and thoughtfulness as well. So if you have certain things that you're wondering about, you can prepare some questions in advance and also be ready to come up with questions during the interview if new thoughts arise through that process. Yeah, that is a good way to really broaden your knowledge of the school. And kind of related to that, when you're coming into an interview for a specific school, make sure that you've thought about why you are attracted to that school, because they're likely to ask what makes you think that this school is a good fit for you. And it's really important that you've looked through the website and the materials and considered what about it, about the campus or about the community at this school, makes you consider going there. It's better not to give a generic answer, but to really be able to name specific attributes about that particular school.
Yeah, great. And I would say, don't just like memorize the keywords from the website, because that's not going to be helpful to you either. Well, great. So I know this is going to be a question, and I do want to encourage people, if you have questions, go ahead and ask them. So because I don't want to run out of time when you finally ask the questions. And some of these questions might take a little bit of time to unpack. So if you have a question, go ahead and ask it in the Q&A box. But I was just going to ask, what are the topics? Students always say, what topics, what topics are you going to ask about? Like, what questions are you going to ask? And at Initial View, we don't have a set, we don't have set questions at all. We have some set goals. So maybe we can talk a little bit, what are the goals for you as an admissions officer when you're reviewing an interview, when you're thinking about how the interview plays into the application? What are the topics that you're hoping for?
I did kind of allude to this before with the goal of the interview. It's just to kind of see how a student might interact in the classroom. I don't know if there's like specific topics that we're looking for because each school is very different. And also I can't imagine that there's any school that's like, this is the one topic that all students need to be experts on. But I think just generally, you know, kind of trying to gauge how a student might interact intellectually, you know, what kind of intellectual exercises that they're doing. And that doesn't need to be like, you know, doing math problems in your free time. But things that might not come out in the application is like somebody who's really interested in birds, spending a lot of time on their own, like studying birds and ornithology and all of that. That's the right word, right? Anyway, kind of studying birds and, you know, and flight patterns and local flora and fauna and all that kind of stuff. That wouldn't necessarily come across in the application, but it kind of shows us how you're interacting with the world in an intellectually curious way. And I know that most schools that are accepting interviews are really interested in understanding how students are interacting with the world in various different ways that are unique to you.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, those are great points that Lisa mentioned. And I would also add that when we do interviews, we like to get a sense of what a student most wants to get out of the college experience so that we can assess whether or not our school seems like a good fit for the particular student, because each of our schools is going to have attributes that are a little bit different from others, and they may not be exactly what each student wants. For example, at Wesleyan, we have very non-traditional Greek life. So if a student is applying and really wants to be involved in Greek life on campus, this might not be the right fit for that student. If a student's interested in a specific program that a school doesn't have, that's also a really good indication that if that student is admitted, they might not be happy on campus. And especially as numbers of applications continue to increase at highly selective colleges, we have to be very mindful about fit as we make decisions as part of the holistic process.
Colby, did you have anything to add?
Not really. Yeah, I think Lisa and Miranda kind of covered everything. I think really the end goal is just to see that fit for the most part, and that will be different for each college. But I think that's usually the kind of the end goal from each college, is to see, is that fit there. And I think it's also, when we think of interviews, a lot of students think of it just being a one way, like, will I fit into this college? It's also opportunity for you to kind of think about the questions that they asked you and how that conversation went, and to think, is that college gonna be a good fit for you, like this way, right? Not just outward towards the college, but was that conversation, well, the questions that they asked you align with who you are as a person, your values, right? So it's kind of a back and forth. So I like to think of interviews as a two-way street, and not just the student to the interviewer.
Yeah, and it's a great way for you all to be reflecting. And this is why we were saying, you know, do some kind of mock interviews with your friends, because I think if you start having conversations with other people and you realize, I'm really bored at what I'm talking about. Like if they're asking you about an academic subject and you realize like, oh, I don't really actually want to talk about this. That's information for yourself. Like, oh, maybe I should think about, you know, why I'm studying what I'm studying, or, you know, should I be thinking about, you know, let's say you thought you wanted to study economics, but you actually really lit up when you talked about birds. So maybe you're like, oh, should I be thinking about pursuing some other academic field? That's really great information for you. So so do kind of think about, like, do I get excited? Do I have spark? And initially we call it like, what's your expertise? And when we say expertise, we don't mean that you're an actual expert. Like, you're going to go to college. We know that you are not, like, you don't know everything about black holes. But if you like are thinking about black holes all the time, you wake up thinking about them, you go to bed thinking about them, then probably that's an expertise of yours. And if that's the case, then you do want to spend some time making sure you have the vocabulary for that, making sure that you are able to, predict the follow-up question on that, because then you're able to really kind of display. And I'll just add too, in some of the interviews that I've watched, I think that a lot of students, you try very hard to say the thing that you think that admissions officers want to hear instead of saying the thing that you actually are. And that makes it difficult actually for admissions officers to ascertain true fit. Because if you're trying really hard to contort yourself a certain way and it's not natural and it's not what you are, then I think it becomes more difficult to see if you're going to be an actual fit at the institution. So definitely be yourself. Like, that's what we always talk about. Like, the biggest advice that we can give in the interview is to be yourself. Great. So let's see. I'm just going to ask. Okay, nobody has any questions. We're just doing such a good job, friends. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, I might switch internet again in a minute here. Okay, let's see. Looking at the questions on the other platform. Okay, is there a no topic? I know you said that it doesn't really matter the topics. But is there like a please don't talk about this, or if you talked about this, that would be a red flag for me? Like, are there like no topics?
I think the only real topic or real thing that you should not do by any means is making negative comments about another group of people. As long as you're respectful and open and show curiosity and willingness to learn about others, you're likely to leave a positive impression. But if you bring up something derogatory about another group, that will definitely not go over well.
I think that's absolutely right, Miranda. Like, yeah, we don't really want people on campus who are not going to play well with others. But also, the interview is a very personal conversation, but you also don't need to take it too personal. So, keeping it professional is also important. We don't need to hear about like things about your life that maybe you wouldn't say in polite company. Yeah, think of it. While we don't want it to be super formal, we also don't want it to be so informal that we as viewers feel uncomfortable. So just kind of making sure that you have that balance and you understand where that line is. That's important as well.
Those are
So,
really good ones.
oh, sorry, Colby.
No problem. You're good. I was gonna say this might be a little too much, but think about conversations or topics that might be a little decisive or divisive between people, a group of people. So unless you're gonna go into like political science, maybe talking about politics where you don't know the political background of your interviewer, that might just get to a bias that if you don't identify with them or anything like that. So just kind of think about that, where so it's big topics that people are really split on. Maybe going away from those topics might be beneficial for you.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's always a challenging thing because you do want to kind of show who you are, but there are certain topics where you might want to talk about it more philosophically, right? Where some people think this and some people think that, and then talk about if you are talking about something political or an issue that is more sensitive, to really go back and forth a little bit with what the different views are. And that's tricky and challenging. It's tricky and challenging about life. And that's what I love about the interview, because it is mirroring what college is going to be, where you're going to have some challenging conversations that maybe about things that you hadn't thought about before, and how to be kind and sensitive in the midst of debate and in the midst of disagreement. So thank you for asking questions. I see some coming up here now. So there's definitely this misconception, I think, that only extroverted people should do an interview, and that introverted people, maybe it's not going to highlight their strengths. So let's talk about that. What do you all think about introverted students and how they should approach the interview, and how it may or may not be an advantage for them?
Yeah, I definitely think introverted people can definitely do really well in an interview. I think you can come off either really nervous and shy and just like within yourself, or you can come off very critically and thoughtful of, okay, I'm getting all this information, I'm reflecting, and then I'm all speaking. Might be quietly, it might be, just not extrovertedly, like outward, but you can do it in a thoughtful and critical manner. So we understand people, like probably most, I think more, all my friends are mostly introverted, so we get that, right? And it could be a stressful thing, but also practicing with those fake interviews and those mock interviews kind of can help you develop some of those skills of going back and forth. So just think about how you're presenting yourself. So with that suggestion earlier about recording yourself and seeing how you are presenting yourself, that can help you see if you are really shy and withdrawn, or if you like are more outward and having good eye contact and maybe speaking a little bit more with your hands a little bit, right?
Yeah, and when we're talking about virtual interviews, the good eye contact becomes good camera contact, which can be tricky in its own way, but practicing looking at the camera on your computer while you're talking instead of looking down at the screen where it might appear that you're closing your eyes or looking down the whole time. But yeah, introverts definitely can bring strengths to an interview, especially in terms of reflectiveness and communicating what they're interested in, have deep knowledge about. I would second that it's important to practice presenting yourself with confidence. But that doesn't mean that you have to be the most extroverted person in the room. We mentioned earlier that part of the reason we do interviews is to make sure that people will contribute in the classroom at the university, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to be extremely outspoken. We also know that there's value in diversity and having students in the classroom who may be quiet more of the time, but when they do share ideas, they are ideas that everyone will benefit from. So definitely interviews with introverts can be very successful. It's just a matter of practice and knowing your strengths and expressing curiosity about others, as well as clearly helping us get a sense of what your strengths and passions are.
Yeah, can you imagine a classroom full of extroverted people? That would be horrible. That would just be terrible. Everybody talking on top of each other and fighting for that. And I would say, one of the advantages of being an introvert is that generally you are a better listener. And so do take that as an advantage. You're going to be hearing the question and really being able to answer it directly. I think same goes advice for extroverts is like, you got to be thoughtful. Extroverts tend to say a lot of words that don't matter. And so since the interview is usually a short amount of time, short-ish, 15 minutes or so, the time you have to kind of make impact is short. And if you're spending a lot of time just being bubbly, you're not going to get to the point. So for you introvert students, that's your advantage. And so you should take that advantage. Your thoughtful answers are going to be really compelling. The other beautiful thing is that it's not like public speaking. You are not in front of a whole crowd. And no one else is watching this interview like in real time, like next to you. They're watching it afterwards. But in real time, no one's like crowding around you. So it's really just one person, and one person who really wants to get to know you, and just trust the interviewer. They're on your side. They're not trying to trip you up. They actually are asking you questions with the hope that you are able to showcase your best parts. So don't be anxious about that. Obviously, we're dealing with a lot of people who are not native English speakers. So The question here is, does pronunciation matter or grammatical errors matter when you are either conducting an interview or listening to an interview?
I would say that light pronunciation and grammatical mistakes does not matter quite as much. But if it is a very consistent or obvious language barrier, we are English speaking institutions, and so we do need to make sure that our students are coming on campus able to participate as soon as they arrive. At least in this group, I'm fairly certain that we don't have like English language programs that you could do before matriculating. And not like some schools do that, but I would say not very many have that option. And so we definitely want to make sure that students are able to start contributing as soon as they come on campus. So I wouldn't stress too much if you're like mispronouncing the occasional word, or if there's like light grammatical errors, because I would say none of us are perfect in that. I definitely have issues with some grammar. But if it's a struggle to understand the point that you're trying to make, then that could contribute into how we're reviewing your interview.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I am going to share a screen here because I asked my colleagues to kind of give some advice. And a lot of these things they already said in this conversation, but I just wanted to put them up there in case you came in late or you didn't hear them. Go ahead and take a screenshot of the advice that we're giving you. And also, so much of admissions is a human process, and there are real people on the other side. And I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we get so engaged in our like writing and our, getting our materials together. And then we're a little bit worried that it's just this black box and some numbers spit out and then, ta-da, the results are there. But really it's a human process. So I want to encourage you all to reach out to these colleagues of mine if you have more questions about their institutions. They all have great virtual sessions. If you want to know more about whether or not your fit is actually there, you should definitely watch it, because that will give you an indication of what type of community they have, and how you could potentially contribute to that. And so much of the interview, like I said, the context it's not one thing, but it is helping to tie all the things that you presented together. And so if they are, if you are understanding what they're looking for, and then you can kind of see like, I can imagine myself there. If you can imagine yourself there, then that means they can imagine you there as well when they're listening to the interview. So that's what I'm talking about. Don't pigeonhole yourself in, just be yourself, and they'll be able to imagine.
So it looks like Gloria's frozen again. So I'll just add some words of advice for applicants. In the whole application process can be stressful at times, but I'm sure that you'll do well. Hi, Gloria.
I'm here. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, guys. I think I sorry about my internet today. It's really, really unstable for some reason. But I appreciate all of you being here. Colby, Miranda, Lisa, thank you for taking time, especially Colby for waking up at like 4:45 a.m. And again, if you guys have specific questions, I know some specific questions are coming up about the institutions, please do reach out to the schools. They have great info sessions where they're going to be talking about school specific things. So if you have school specific things, please go to their virtual sessions. I'm going to hang on for another 10-15 minutes or so. If people have specific logistical questions about initial view specifically, since we're talking about interviews, I didn't want to take up our time earlier, but if you have specific questions about initial view, I'm going to hang on for another 10, 15 minutes, but I am going to let my colleagues go because it is travel season for them. They are actually really trying to recruit and explain their institutions so that the right people apply. So for everybody else, we're going to take a little break from Tuesday Talks for the next couple of weeks as we prepare for this application season, but keep an eye out on your email and we'll let you know when the next Tuesday Talk is coming. Thank you so much, friends. Have a really great day and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right, anybody who wants to hang on to talk about initial view specific kind of questions, I'm here and happy to answer more questions. For those of you who don't know, Initial View is a platform that we have our own interviewers that are trained. A lot of them are former admissions officers, former college counselors, and they'll have a conversation with you for about 15 minutes. And then you'll have a writing sample that you can complete as well. And then you can send that one interview to as many schools as possible. Now, earlier, these 3 institutions, they also offer their own interviews, but the availability is not always there. And also, those are school specific. So our interview is not school specific, and it is meant to be not school specific so that you can be yourself. We have sent our interviews to over 300, maybe close to 400 universities. So really, you can send your interview to almost any school. And there's no limit for you either. So you pay one time to do the interview, and then you can send it to as many schools as you want. So if you want to do it for ED, for example, and you do one interview, send it, and then ED doesn't go well, then you have regular decision and you can come back and use the same interview and send to as you'd like. On average, I think people send to anywhere between 7 to 15 schools. And it's great because you only have to do one interview and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Thank you for that question. What other questions do people have? So yes, will the interview questions be tailored around the information we submit? So we don't actually ask you to submit very much information. You will give us your basic high school information. So we know where you're going to high school and some demographics. And that's all we really know. There's a little bit of a question when you fill out your ticket about if you have an academic interest, and that just gives an academic and an extracurricular interest, that gives the interviewer a sense that maybe you're going to be talking in that direction. But actually, we don't know a ton about you. So that the advice is you actually have to kind of come in right away, ready to give us something to talk about. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times the first question might be something like, tell me about your weekend. And so, tell me about your weekend is an opportunity to kind of talk about how you spent your time. So if I ask you, tell me about your weekend, and you can talk about anything. And it doesn't have to be like, I don't want people to feel pressure like, oh, I did, I worked in a lab because, it could just be like, I didn't work in a lab. I had some rest time and I read a great book and I watched a movie. It can be anything like that. But the goal of that is to start getting you to talk about how you spend your time. Because once you talk about how you spend your time, we can talk a little bit about why you do the things you do. And then you can get yourself to an academic interest or an extracurricular interest. So yes, it at that point, it will be tailored to who you are, because we're not going to just throw out a question to like, what do you think about, gene therapy? Because if you're not interested in biology, that question's never going to come up. We're not going to talk about, philosophy if you were talking about chemistry, right? So it will to your interest and it will follow you, which means that you actually have this great opportunity to kind of take control of the conversation a bit. Not in a way, now remember, like the admissions officers have been talking about, this fit and, whether or not you are going to be a contributing member of campus. So if you don't want to come across haughty, prideful, disregarding of others. So taking control of a conversation means taking control in the sense of like, let's guide the questions to what I want to talk about. But if the interviewer asks you a different question, pivots, the reason they do that is for your good, actually. They might be thinking you're talking about something for a really long time and you've already talked about that enough and we need to move on to another topic. Trust that they actually have your best interests at heart and are moving the conversation along. But yes, it will be tailored to you. It will be very specific to you, and it is a chance for you to kind of shine. Good question. Earlier, there was a question, when we were talking about topics not to talk about, I know that Colby talked about, not talking about anything that's too disagree, like could be controversial. And I think if you have strong opinions about something, I think it's okay to share them as long as you're not being insensitive. So, to give an example, someone here is asking about feminism and patriarchy and how you are against patriarchy. Like, I think that's okay to talk about. I think you want to just be delicate where you're not accusing, especially let's say your interviewer just happened to be a man. You want to talk about it in a way where it's delicate and you're not making it sound like you're accusing him, right? But I think you can talk about it, especially if you talk about it from an educational point of view and an intellectually curious point of view. I think many schools, especially liberal arts colleges, will actually find that fascinating and interesting. So we're not saying shy away from these potentially controversial topics. We are just saying that you should be sensitive. And so my advice for you, if you're thinking about that, you're like, I feel really strongly about gender studies. I really want to talk about, the injustices of the world. That's super great. What I would advise you to do is find a teacher, find a counselor, find an adult that you trust, and kind of talk about those issues with them and see how they feel. Like say, oh, you're being a little bit insensitive the way that you're saying that, or you're being a little accusatory in the way that you're saying that. That will help you kind of gauge, am I dialoguing in a way that is helpful, that is educational, that is bringing to light some things that can be changed. I think that's fine. I hope that is helpful to the student who asked that question. These are great questions. Yeah, again, I think the key to remember is that the interview in and of itself is not the end all be all. You do have your whole application. So you just want to think about, how does the interview help the admission officer understand me? How does it set me apart? Because the reality is many of you are super strong students, and your transcript is going to look very similar. And your essays, they could be unique, but a lot of people write about similar topics, honestly. And your activities list is going to look very, very similar. So really what you're trying to do is be like, okay, even though I do, let's say I'm in the orchestra, so are all these 10 other people. They're also in the orchestra. And maybe in your activities list, you're able to say well, I'm the chair for my instrument, still there's probably 10 other chairs as well. So really, the interview is trying to kind of get at the deeper meaning of those activities, or for example, on your transcript, you're really great at every subject, but they want to see, like, are you really great at every subject because you're just really good at memorizing, you're really good at taking tests, or are you really like good at all the subjects because you have this intellectual mind that's moving back and forth and you're always asking questions? And that kind of thing is what you're trying to highlight in the interview, so that whatever is on your application pops out a little bit more. And they're able to differentiate the students that all of you have a 4.0 or a 5.0, depending on how your school rates you. Great, but this person is like really kind of thinking higher level here and able to participate in these deep conversations on campus. So think about it that way. I think a lot of people are like, oh no, like I want to have the right answer. There's really no right answer. The right answer is like, are you able to illuminate something about yourself that doesn't come across on paper as evidently? Great. Okay. Other questions? The way that y'all are asking questions makes me think that you already know a lot about initial view. So I'm not going to talk too much about the logistical details. If you are having any trouble with the sign-up process or the ticket process or anything like that, do make sure that you email us. My colleagues and I will definitely answer you pretty quickly. And so if you're like having any struggles with that, definitely email us. So, good question. How will Initial View do the evaluation to our interview? So guess what? We don't evaluate because we're not the admissions officers. So we don't give you a score. We don't write a report. We don't say anything. We just give the interview directly to the school. And we do it in a way where it's easy to process. So the questions that are asked are all listed out. The admissions officer can click really quickly and bounce around if they don't want to listen to the whole thing, or they don't have time to listen to the whole thing, or however each school kind of does it differently. We make it so that's easy to process, but we don't say anything about the student. They don't know how the interviewer feels. And that's what's so great about it, because we can have a conversation without feeling the pressure to evaluate you. Now, how does a school evaluate the interview is a good question. And different schools have different things that they're looking for. So earlier, somebody asked about grammar and pronunciation. Now, like Lisa said, you can make some mistakes and there's nobody docking points, but they are looking at communication ability, right? So they want to make sure that you are going to be able to survive. Now, making grammatical errors left and right all the time is going to make it a little bit more challenging to survive, because if people aren't immediately able to understand you, then that might impact how the dynamics of the classroom are. But it's not like TOEFL, right? It's not like they're not like, X for when you use the wrong preposition, or they're not going to do that. They probably don't even know. But there are, so admissions officers have told me that sometimes when they review, they're just listening in the background. So they are kind of listening for anything that might bring to attention something else. So, if your activities list, for activities list, for example, you didn't really list, if you have an activity and you didn't kind of list that you were the captain or that you won some award, but then you talk about and then be like, oh, okay, that was good to know. So the evaluation is not, there's no score. Now, I will tell you, one school told me that they have a school score, meaning like a fit score. They have come up with a fit score, which means like there are certain characteristics. Maybe that school is very pragmatic and service oriented. So when they hear things where the student is very practical, or the student is very like helpful and kind and wants to serve their community, that's going to give them a higher quote unquote fit score. So those are all things that are a little bit out of your control, honestly, which is why you don't need to think about like, oh, check the box rubric, which is very difficult because it's very different than every other class that you take where you get a grade. You're not going to really get a grade for initial view. So don't be anxious about that. Just remember that the key to doing a good job is actually being completely yourself and really making sure to highlight certain things that don't come across on paper as strongly. I hope it's helpful with the evaluation piece. Same thing goes for the writing sample. We don't grade that. We don't, and I will tell you, admissions officers, they themselves are not English teachers either. So they're not grading in the sense of English. They are actually just looking to see, okay, what can you produce in 20 minutes when nobody else is giving you any help? And you don't have any kind of like tools to help you with the spelling and the grammar. They just want to see what happens. And it is a chance for you again to be yourself and again to highlight some creativity or critical thought that's a little bit that may not have come out in your application. So, but you don't have to worry about the grade. It's not going to be, there's no rubric for that. I have talked to one school that they do use one of their writing departments to kind of look at the writing samples to kind of ascertain what might be helpful for you in your first year. And this is not, when I was a first year, I'm a native English speaker. When I was a first year, we had to take a writing class. That was a requirement for all of the first year. So that doesn't have to do with English. It just has to do with writing ability. And so there is one told me that they use the writing department, and they told me that the biggest mistake they see in the writing sample is they can tell when you've taken some other writing that you've done before and jammed it into the writing sample, because the first paragraph is a little bit more raw writing, and then it's very polished, and then another raw piece. So that would be the caution. Do not try to put something that you've memorized before into the writing sample, because you just really need to look at the question and answer the question. They're really good questions. I feel like because you're asking such good questions, you're going to be so prepared. I'm gonna hang out for 2 more minutes. Any other questions? Let's see. I'm going to make sure nobody else. Okay, last call. Any other questions? It can be about anything interview related. All right, well, I think that means that I did a good job of making sure all the information is shared. And also, what to wear? Good question. I would say wear something that makes you feel confident and comfortable. Don't wear something that might be distracting. That's all I want to say. So I'll give an example. A student came one time with a suit on, and I could tell that he never wore a suit before, and it was really uncomfortable for him. Like he kept kind of messing with his collar and tie, and that ended up being distracting, especially because if you have earphones with a microphone and you're doing this, then it's all rustling and then you can't hear the answer. So don't wear anything that you're just not comfortable wearing. Also, don't wear stuff that might fluff out, because again, with the microphones and the earphones and stuff, like sometimes there's a crackling noise, and that does become distracting. And keep in mind, an admissions officer, when they're listening to the interview, they're kind of listening in the background while they read the rest of the application. And if they hear like a annoying crackling noise, that's them distracted and want to just turn it off. So wear something where it's not going to impact it. So people with long hair, that is maybe something to think about. You might want to tie it up so that your hair is not rustling into the microphone, or your hair is not getting into your face and just like bothering you. Just like that's something to think about. And the final thing I'll say is maybe don't wear a college shirt because you want to be able to use this interview for multiple schools. So, you don't really want to wear a Stanford t-shirt if you're interviewing and you want to send it to Yale. I mean, they're just going to be like, okay, go to Stanford. So, and that goes for anything with words, actually, not just college t-shirts, but anything with words can distract the interviewer or distract the watcher. So those are the only kind of quote unquote rules for clothing. Otherwise, just be comfortable. Remember that in most situations at this point, unless you are able to meet with an alumni in person, most of the time we're just talking about this, so whatever's on the top half, you need to worry about. But if you do, for some reason, have an opportunity to be in person with an alumni or an admissions office, just look presentable. Like, I've had admissions officers saying a school uniform is great. Even the school tracksuit is great because they're just in there. You student are just in your element. So don't be over anxious about your clothing, but do think about what might be distracting. Like, even today, I was a little bit like, oh, maybe I should put my hair up. I hope people can hear me. So those are the things to think about with clothing. And lighting is important. So if you have, if you're doing your interview during the daytime and there's a lot of sun coming in, you might want to kind of come to a place where you're angling your computer so that the sun isn't washing out your face. That's why a lot of people have a light in front of them as well to make sure their face is lit up. Your sound is going to be important. So test out a few different kind of microphones, or you don't need a microphone per se. Your computer microphone is usually more than adequate, but it's just the earphones. AirPods actually are awful. I'm wearing them right now. Don't wear them for an interview. There's a high likelihood that it could impact the sound for some reason. Too bad for Apple. It's not really the best. If you have just kind of normal wired Apple ones, those are actually better. And you don't need the mic on the wire, actually. The mic on the computer is usually adequate enough. So, but test that out, with your friends. Make sure you get on Zoom or some other platform and test your equipment to make sure that's not being distracting. Okay. Wonderful. Well, it was great talking to you all. Thanks for hanging on. I know that you all are busy and there's a lot of things that you need to be worried about in your application process, but I'm excited for you. I know it feels like this is the biggest thing now, but later you're going to be like, there's, it's just a small blip in your life. So try to enjoy it while you can. And I'll miss you all for the next couple of weeks since we won't have Tuesday Talks, but do check your emails because we will have more Tuesday Talks later. Enjoy your evening, afternoon, wherever you are, morning, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.